She had assumed she would die on American soil. At the very least, she had assumed she would be humiliated, interrogated, forced to say something. Yet what actually awaited her was an emotionless number, an aluminum meal tray, and a medical examination schedule executed by the minute. This was not the enemy camp she had been taught to imagine. It was the first time she felt like a wild creature from the mountains coming face to face with civilization. From the moment her feet touched that strip of damp, cold concrete, she felt a kind of dislocation so strange it was almost shameful, as if everything around her knew far better than she did where she was supposed to go. On a foggy morning along the California coast, when the harbor lights had not yet fully gone out and points of pale gold glimmered on the surface of the sea, Yamada Keiko was escorted down from the transport ship. When her feet hit the ground, she did not dare lift her head. She had been drilled and indoctrinated again and again. The American military would not accept Japanese surrender and certainly would not accept female prisoners. She had expected to see interrogation tables and chairs, chains, or some apparatus that symbolized punishment. Instead, what she saw was a straight line drawn in white chalk, emphasized clearly, quietly, without threat. Prisoners of war were ordered to advance along that line, as if they were carrying out some pre-designed procedure, and procedure in itself was power. American MPs stood by the line, rifles lowered. They did not shout, did not shove. Keiko had never seen soldiers like this. In her understanding, soldiers either roared or killed in silence. There was rarely this posture, neither hostile nor benevolent. One of the MPs opened a clipboard. His voice was clean, crisp, and without the slightest drag. "Yamada Keiko." The precise pronunciation made her chest tighten, as if an invisible hand had gripped her throat. For years she had heard her name mispronounced by Japanese military authorities, had grown used to being handled carelessly. Yet here, in an enemy country, she was identified accurately for the first time. Precision was a cold form of power, more frightening than a shout. Being seen is more terrifying than being harmed. Those were not her words, but in that moment they felt like a needle pressed against her nerves. She forced herself to follow the line. The texture of the concrete under her feet was unlike anything she had known. Not the mud of battlefields, not the hastily hardened runway of an airstrip, but the finished solid foundation of a rear area untouched by war. Small stones were embedded in the concrete. Footsteps landed with a solid sound. She felt completely out of place, as if even her footsteps were staining this ground. That sense of inferiority was not about currying favor with the strong. It rose from a deeper awareness that she did not belong to the world of order. Trucks rumbled to life in the distance, the sound of supplies being moved mingling with the harsh cries of seabirds. Keiko was guided into the back of a truck, packed in with a dozen other Japanese women. She kept her head down, both hands gripping her knees, trying to shrink her presence to the smallest possible size. She had been taught the American military would first watch the degree of intimacy between prisoners, then decide the interrogation order. She did not know where that idea had come from, but after being repeated for years, it had become part of her belief. She did not even dare glance at the women sitting beside her. No one in the truck spoke. Only the engine roared, vibrating through the metal walls. As the vehicle drove into the camp, she saw barbed wire, guard towers, wooden fences, and barracks laid out in perfect symmetry. The barbed wire was not the rough, improvised fencing she had seen at island hospitals. It was mass-produced industrial material, evenly spaced, with a uniform metallic sheen. The barracks were all the same height, the window frames in the same proportions, the wooden planks laid out in the same sequence, as if each building had been cut from a template. American strength did not reside only in weapons. It resided in this immense, cold standardization. Order itself was a warning. When the truck stopped, she was led to an unloading area where an American Army doctor with a white mask stood waiting. His movements were professional and fast, without any trace of wariness or contempt. He seemed less like someone facing an enemy than like a man carrying out a dull but necessary task, receiving new items. Keiko realized that here she was not a prisoner, not a threat, not even truly an enemy. She was an entry to be logged. When you realize you are only a number, dignity stings more sharply than hunger. The feeling quickly cut off her breath. She was lined up in front of an open space for initial intake. The Americans had set up temporary checkpoints divided by region. On the table nearby lay medical cards, number tags, small thermometers of a type she had never seen before, along with pencil boxes and erasers. The tabletop was neat and uniform, more like a classroom than a war zone. What unsettled her even more was the attitude of the American medical staff. They did not interrogate, did not scrutinize, they simply filled in forms and collected basic data. This disregard made her back more rigid than any rifle barrel could. With each step the line advanced, her heart shrank a little more. She did not know what lay at the end of the process, but every step felt like a prelude to interrogation, without the interrogation ever appearing. Her thoughts grew chaotic. If the enemy did not use violence, did not threaten, did not humiliate, what did they intend to do? When there is no clear hostility, people are most likely to collapse. That was what she was living through. When she was finally called to the table, the army doctor looked up, matched her name carefully against the English letters on his chart, then placed a temperature recording card in her hand. It was the first time in her life she had held a document prepared with such precision. There was a number, a date, a measurement range, an observation period, and a signature line. No warnings, no hints of threat, no extra remarks. Only a system. For a moment, she felt a flush of shame, as if she were a wild creature caught in the open by civilization. When the door to the examination room swung open, a cool air washed over her. It was not sea wind, not dampness from the harbor. It was the smell of disinfectant, a concentration she had never truly encountered in Japanese military hospitals. The field hospitals she had seen during her service had smelled mostly of vinegar, alcohol, and the steam of bandages boiled again and again. Real disinfection had been rare. Conditions did not allow it. She was used to rinsing wounds with warm water, wrapping them in cloth strips sterilized only by repeated boiling. She had never seen metal instruments shining this brightly. The cold gleam of steel made her want to flee. Inside, the examination area was divided by canvas curtains, each labeled with a number. The top edge of every curtain was fixed to a rod by iron hooks, neither sagging nor askew. She could not imagine who, this late in the war, still had the energy to keep such details so exact. Yet, the Americans clearly did. She was directed to the section marked B3. A military doctor gestured for her to stand against a height scale. As he adjusted the equipment, he read off the numbers in a calm, flat tone. There was no emotion in his voice, yet every figure he announced felt like a spike driven into her nerves, because she realized those numbers were more important than she was. Height, weight, temperature, pulse, lung sounds. Each item was noted down quickly and matched to her card. The doctor's movements showed no hesitation, and none of the pauses one expected from an interrogator. He did not care whether she was nervous, did not care which unit she came from. He cared only whether the needle on the instrument was balanced, whether the numbers were accurate, whether the record was clear. In that moment, she understood. The Americans were not trying to get something out of her mouth. They were trying to put her into a system. Her fear grew more tangled. When the enemy takes no interest in your thoughts, you begin to doubt your own existence. The doctor motioned for her to remove her shoes. Her throat tightened. In the Japanese military, being made to remove one's shoes was often the prelude to humiliation or punishment. She had seen supply soldiers in training forced to stand barefoot on sand for half an hour because of a counting error, the soles of their feet rubbed raw, blood mixing with sand into hard crusts. Her fear of taking off her shoes was a reflex. Yet the doctor's tone held no mockery, no harsh command. He simply wanted her feet on the wooden board so the height could be measured accurately. She hesitated for 3 full seconds. 3 seconds of silence made the doctor look up. His glance held no anger, no impatience. It was no more than the brief pause of a man dealing with a minor mechanical issue. That tiny look brought a shame deeper than any humiliation, because Keiko realized that her fear had no meaning in this room. It was as if she had dragged some primitive wildness into a modern city, only to see it dissolved effortlessly by order. Civilization is not gentle. It simply leaves you nowhere to plant your feet. She took off her shoes. The tops of her feet trembled slightly from tension. The doctor did not glance at them. He merely wrote down the figures and moved on. The entire process was as calm as a production line. No one cared that she was Japanese, that she was a prisoner, that she might or might not cooperate. No one tried to read schemes into her silence. No one heightened their guard because of her watchfulness. She was a number, not an enemy. When they led her to have blood drawn, her arm went numb, not from the needle, but from the realization that this system did not need her to think, did not need her to answer, did not even need her to cooperate. Her emotions were not being calculated at all. In the Japanese army, her emotions had to be suppressed in order to obey. In the American system, her emotions were ignored, they were not even a variable. That contrast was the sharpest cut of all. When the examination was finished, her temperature card was clipped to a strap across her chest. The card lay cold against her skin, making one fact inescapable. The US military was not treating her simply as a prisoner. They were treating her as a subject under the Geneva Convention. This was a kind of internationally recognized personal value she had never possessed. Yet it left her utterly at a loss, for she neither understood nor was accustomed to such an identity, granted and defined by rules. Rich rules are more confusing than cruel ones. She was led into the next procedure. Procedures seemed endless. Every step was like a mirror, showing her how wild and fearful she appeared within civilization. In the distribution area of the camp, a sergeant placed an aluminum tray into her hands. For an instant, she instinctively assumed it was a tool of punishment. It was too bright, too hard, too unfamiliar. But the sergeant simply moved on to the next person without a glance. The tray's weight was perfectly balanced, standardized according to US field ration regulations. It was not a weapon, not a threat. It was just equipment. Yet in her world, nothing was ever just equipment. Her chest tightened even further. When the sunlight came down from overhead, she realized for the first time she had not been defeated by the enemy. She had been swallowed by order. She even began to doubt whether she had ever truly understood war. In the world she had grown up in, war was an extremely simple binary. Loyalty or betrayal, survival or death, hatred or sacrifice. In this American camp, war became numbers, procedures, records, supply, sanitation, statistics. These things were stronger than guns, more reliable than firepower, and far harder to resist. As she stood at the camp entrance, watching the pattern of wood planks and shadows crisscross under the sun, her first impulse was to flee. Not from the enemy, but from a civilization that left her nowhere to run. The deepest fear is not death, but seeing, for the first time, a world that runs in its own way, and finding that you have no place in it. The first night inside the camp was the quietest of Yamada Keiko's life, and the most suffocating. The pressure came not from violence or shouting, but from a sense of order that flattened her spirit. The barracks were long rectangles, the wooden boards washed with pale preservative. Beds were set out in 2 rows, the space between each one an identical 80 centimeters, no more, no less. 2 lamps hung from the ceiling, their shades stamped with US logistics numbers. The light was steady, without flicker. There was none of the damp, moldy smell of a battlefield. Instead, the air held a faint mix of soap and disinfectant. She sat on the edge of her bed, fingers locked tightly around the rim of her aluminum tray. It was so bright it hurt her eyes, like a silent mirror reflecting her unease even more clearly. She did not know where to put it. In the Japanese army, personal mess gear had to be defended by the individual amid chaos. It was common for it to be broken, stolen, or lost in the camp. Here, the sergeant had told them, trays were returned to a fixed place each day for disinfection and collection. The idea was so foreign she could hardly believe it. When a system does not rely on your vigilance, you finally realize how tightly wound you have been. On the small cabinet by her bed lay a neatly folded blanket, with a blank temperature card pinned under one corner. She stared at that card. It resembled a cooled-down order, telling her, "Tomorrow morning, you will be recorded again." She did not know why being recorded frightened her, perhaps because, in this system, a person's existence was never decided by that person, but by forms, numbers, and procedures. That passivity sent a muted ache through some hidden place inside her. Her hands would not stop shaking. She felt like a wild animal that had strayed into a settlement, every quiet, orderly, bright detail reminding her that she did not belong. At lights out, The barracks went dark. Footsteps passed outside in a regular patrol pattern like a metronome. Every step made the muscles along her spine tense. She closed her eyes, braced for the worst. Night raids, interrogation, humiliation. Nothing happened. The only sound was the distant, faint music of a gramophone, soft, broken, without hostility. It was precisely this absence of hostility that would not let her sleep. You can strike back at hostility. Silence gives you nothing to strike. The next morning, a whistle woke her. The air was cold. As she rose, she instinctively placed a hand over her chest as if to shield something. She did not know how to get out of bed without orders, nor how to spend a night without sudden disturbances. The American order was simple and stable, so stable that she felt as if she might be left behind at any moment. When she stepped outside and saw the faint white assembly marks on the ground, she felt a shame like being treated as an object. Her position was not random. It had been planned in advance. She was not questioned, not driven, only assigned how to stand. Her mind was not needed. She stepped into her designated spot, feet as stiff as if nailed down. Roll call was more mechanical than she had imagined, and more emotionless. A U.S. corporal held a roster and a pencil. His voice was not loud, but steady with the rhythm of long drilling. Each name he read, a number answered, a position was confirmed. Her throat was dry with tension. When it was her turn, the corporal lifted his head and read, with a slight nasal tone, "Yamada, Keiko." Her heart jolted. Instinct drove her to answer too quickly. 14, no, 13. She had given the wrong number. Her stomach clenched. Cold sweat slid down her back. In the Japanese army, in training, in supply lines, in air raid assembly points, she had never seen a numbering error go unpunished. Reprimands, shouting, force standing, pushing, kicking. She had seen all of it. On the battlefield's rear, a wrong number meant confusion. Confusion meant responsibility. Responsibility meant punishment. Her body's conditioned reflex surged. She braced for yelling or a blow. She did not dare raise her head. The corporal paused for a second, then gently crossed out one number on the roster and wrote the correct one beside it. No irritation, no anger, no change in expression, just a motion of confirming existence. Keiko felt something collapse in her chest. When she finally looked up, nothing in the world had changed. Sunlight jumped on the wooden fence. Smoke rose lightly from the barrack chimneys. The American soldier kept recording. No one had reacted to her mistake. She suddenly understood. In this system, she would not be rewarded for loyalty, and she would not be tortured for errors. She did not even merit the importance of being punished. When a system neither hates you nor loves you, then you are truly lost. Her legs went weak, but she stood straight. Not out of discipline, but because she could not admit to herself that something harder to bear than death had presented itself. Being seen by civilization as replaceable. When roll call ended, she was led to the camp workshop. There, grey-white cotton thread was stacked in neat blocks, each roll the same size. Everyone received the same quantity, the same thickness, the same specifications to mend clothing and make simple items for camp use. When a roll of cotton thread was placed in her hands, she froze again. She did not understand the purpose of giving prisoners such material, and she did not know why the Americans would allow them to have it. In her experience, supplies were always insufficient, always something to fight for, to scrape together, to trade status for. Now these supplies were distributed like air. No struggling, no bargaining, no conditions. She felt a deeper shame. Her anxiety over receiving supplies was the instinct of poverty, not material poverty, but the poverty of a system. Someone who comes from scarcity will instinctively revere stability. She looked down at her hands for the first time. Hands worn by harsh training and crude medical care. Now, those hands held a roll of precisely weighed cotton thread. An indescribable confusion rose in her. It was as if she had been peeled open and laid bare inside an order she could not escape. She did not yet realize that the real impact still lay ahead. For the power of a system is never a single blow. It is continuous, gentle, and relentless in its intrusion. In the end, it would force her to ask again, who am I? What was I in the war? And what am I inside order? The air in the workshop was quieter than outside the camp, quiet enough that she could hear the faint scrape of thread across the wood. Dozens of Japanese women prisoners were assigned to different tables. The tabletops were smooth, not scarred. There were none of the burn marks or dark, stiff stains she had seen on makeshift benches in the field workshops. The wood here was new, sanded, the edges rounded so it would not cut the hand, as if it had been deliberately designed not to injure. Keiko did not know how to face such consideration. In her experience, all facilities were rough, all tools temporary, all supplies something to ration. Now she had been placed in a space with no danger, no shortage, no conflict. This was not kindness. It was a system. And the calmness of a system left someone used to chaos with nowhere to hide. American female clerks moved through the workshop, rapidly logging material use. They took no interest in the prisoners' faces, no interest in where they came from. They watched only whether the rolls of thread were issued according to quota, whether the consumption was properly recorded, whether any damage needed to be reported. Their work did not look like controlling enemies, but like managing the daily output of a factory. Keiko watched these women. The fear in her eyes shifted into confusion. She had never imagined that women in the American rear would help manage a POW camp. In her world, women were hidden, subordinate, never placed at the core of a system. Here she saw a completely different social structure. Women could log records, supervise and report shortages to NCOs in accordance with regulations. She realized that these women might know the administrative rules better than some frontline soldiers. War made her realize for the first time that the world was far larger than she had been taught. Her hands remained stiff on the table. She set the roll of cotton thread down too lightly, as if afraid of soiling the wood. She did not know if she was expected to work, nor what the output of the workshop was meant to achieve. In a system, not understanding is never a reason. One simply executes. The American supervisor walked past her table and glanced at her. It was the look one gives a resource, not a person. No hostility, no curiosity. It was like watching a living creature newly assigned a task, still adapting to its environment. Heat rose slowly to Keiko's face. She realized that here, she was at the lowest level of existence, not because her identity was low, but because the system did not require her to think. Hands trembling, she set the thread aside and began copying the motions of those around her, cutting cotton cloth into strips. The cotton they were given was even in fiber, nothing like the torn sheets reused in island hospitals. Her scissors were not scavenged, not borrowed, not taken from the dead hands of a comrade. They were issued, sterilized, part of a set. There was no rust, the blades so sharp they seemed to cut the air itself. Her heart suddenly constricted. For the first time, she owned a tool that had not been salvaged from ruins. The more she received, the deeper her shame grew. She began to wonder, in earnest, had she always been an exile from another world? Had the picture of the world the Japanese militarists had drilled into her mind never truly existed? Was it possible that what she had thought of as endurance and resilience was insignificant in the face of real industry and real systems? Lost in this confusion, she was caught off guard by a short ring of a bell. The American clerks called out, "Break! 10 minutes!" Prisoners stopped their work. No one scrambled for more time. No one pocketed supplies. Everyone flowed with the order. Keiko had imagined many possible lives as a prisoner, but she had never thought she would be allowed to rest. That made room for a deeper fear. To grant rest is to assume at some level that you are a human being. She had always believed herself to be a tool of the system, a part to be consumed. She could not accept that shift. During the break, another Japanese woman sat beside her. She was a seamstress from Osaka who had mended uniforms in an island hospital. "This place feels like a factory," the woman said softly. Keiko stayed silent. It was not that she did not want to respond. She did not know where to begin. In the militarist system she had come from, she had never been allowed to say the simplest phrase, "I don't understand." When the break ended, the workshop resumed. But Keiko felt as if she were floating. She was no longer afraid of American violence. She was afraid of being drained by the system. She feared that the moment she grew accustomed to order, the old world inside her would collapse entirely. At noon, she received her rationed meal. On the aluminum tray lay mashed potatoes, bread, boiled vegetables, and a small piece of meat. No one checked whether she finished it. No one demanded a display of obedience. Food was just food, distributed according to POW provisions. When she bit into the bread for the first time, her chest clenched. The taste was unfamiliar, but that was not what hurt. What hurt was the realization. She was eating a fixed ration in an enemy country, and she had never truly eaten her fill in her own. Scarcity is a form of education. Abundance is the true shock. That mouthful of bread pushed her closer to collapse than any act of violence. The next morning, the cold air clung to the wooden barracks like frost. Before the whistle even sounded, Keiko was awake. Years of training had conditioned her to tense at the thought of roll call. In her memory, roll call always meant pressure, punishment, or some impending discipline. She stepped onto the faint powder marks and felt her feet stiffen again. Her breath was so shallow, it was almost silent. The corporal approached with the roster, each line clean and precise. Morning light struck the page, giving the entire process a sterile, almost clinical sheen. Name after name, number after number, positions confirmed. The energy that traveled through the ranks was not anxiety, but a stable rhythm. When her turn came, her body reacted before she could think. Her voice trembled as she gave her number, and that tremor pulled something deeper loose. She realized she had already made the same mistake twice. Errors like this had always invited punishment in the Japanese army. Reproach, forced standing, harsher humiliation. She had seen it all. Her stomach knotted, her shoulders hunched involuntarily, braced for a blow. But no blow came. The corporal paused just long enough to check, then corrected the number with the same calm pencil stroke he used for everything else. No anger, no delay, no reaction. The rhythm of roll call did not change at all because of her. What struck her first was not, "I wasn't punished," but, "The system did not care that I erred." It was a stab deeper than scolding, a hollowing out, as she realized she was merely a sign in a process. In the Japanese army, she had been pressed, demanded, trained to endure, to be exact, to carry responsibility. Here, she did not even qualify for attention. The wind moved lightly through the fence. The world remained intact. The pencil moved across the page. Feet moved in formation. Steam rose from the kitchens. No one had noticed her panic. She was no longer a subject to be punished, but a presence to be logged and counted. In that instant, a deeper truth surfaced. Punishment, at least, is a relationship. Being overlooked is a more absolute vacancy. She understood that all her learned reflexes and fears had no place in this system. She was not a threat, not a burden, not even something in need of correction. She was a number, a line on a roster, an entry that had to be marked present. That silent isolation cut sharper than hostility. When roll call ended and she stepped off the line, her legs felt hollow. Everything around her continued, but her world had begun to loosen. She felt for the first time that she was losing the logic of being a soldier and the fear of being a prisoner. She no longer fit the pre-war value system, and she could not yet comprehend the one in front of her. As the formation dispersed into the camp, Keiko walked the wooden path like someone whose weight had been taken away. No danger pressed at her back, and that, more than anything, left her at a loss. Japanese militarist education had described a starkly simple world. The enemy would harm you, superiors would discipline you, comrades would depend on you, and the system would crush you. Now she confronted a third kind of power, one that neither harmed nor cared, but simply went on. That was not neglect, but a complete system sliding overhead, enclosing her without needing her. She felt as though a vast, invisible hand was pressing her into a mold. The mold was cold, neat, and without emotion, yet it disturbed her breathing more deeply than any threat. The mold was not up for debate. It demanded only that shapes be alike. In the afternoon, the workshop reopened. Cotton rolls scraped against wood with a soft rasp. Scissors clicked through cloth, each snip like a metronome binding everyone to the same motion. She watched the American women clerks who once frightened her and saw their gaze land only on forms, cards, and stock numbers. They never glanced toward the prisoners' faces. No one tried to read loyalty or resistance in their expressions. She began to see a larger structure, a modern state's rear area administrative machine mobilized for war. The POW camp was just one node in the system, supply one category of flow, medical records, one stream of data. Managing prisoners was, in truth, managing war resources, and she was one resource entry. The realization brought a pulled, aching sensation somewhere deep inside. For the first time in her life, she was being classified not for what she did, but for the fact that she existed. She did not need to be loyal, did not need to resist. She did not need to speak, did not need to swear allegiance. She only needed to be countable. She had been reduced, yet in that reduction there was also protection. She had been framed, yet within the frame there was acknowledgement. A system is not gentle, it simply refuses to waste. The sentence flashed through her mind like a cold beam of light, illuminating the civilization she had never understood. By night, the camp lights dimmed one by one, leaving only the searchlight on the guard tower sweeping slow arcs across the dark. She sat on her bed, staring at the card pinned over her chest. Nothing but numbers, scales, and signature lines. Yet they revealed a cruel fact. Many of the things she had once believed in, heroic spirits, noble death, purification, revenge, had no place here, not because the Americans rejected them, but because this civilization had never needed them. She felt as if she were being peeled out of one language system and pushed into another entirely alien grammar. In the old world, she had understood every symbol. In this new world, even breathing seemed subject to new rules. Late into the night, faint radio music drifted through the camp, a thin seam of sound as if leaking from some distant city. She lay down and closed her eyes, but sleep would not come. In her mind, the moment from that morning repeated again and again. The light pencil stroke that corrected her number. It had not been a confrontation. It had been a deeper dismantling. Her pride, fear, discipline, vigilance, all of it had been folded up quietly and placed inside a new order. Some civilizations do not conquer with weapons, but with stability. In the darkness, she slowly understood. She had not been defeated by the American military. She had not been carried away. She had been redefined by the world. Time in the camp flowed with a steady rhythm. Daily procedures repeated, records repeated. Trays were washed and sterilized in the same cycles. The entire system was a massive machine in motion, grinding away resistance, opposition, and confusion. Keiko began to realize she could no longer use old logic to explain anything. She had believed war was extremity. Now, for the first time, she grasped a different truth. What truly makes people yield is not extremity, but stability. One afternoon, she stood by the wooden fence, looking out toward the road stretching into the distance. There was no smoke of the front line at the far end, no sign of the enemy hell she had been taught to expect. Only the smooth road of the rear area, warehouses in the distance, trucks moving on schedule, and the ebb and flow of camp routines like the tide. She realized that her old fears had always pointed toward violence, while her new disorientation came entirely from civilization. The most lethal force is not the gun, but the moment the world appears orderly before you for the first time. The thought took root in her mind and held her silent for a long time. When darkness finally settled, she admitted a fact she could scarcely bring herself to say aloud. She was not a wild woman from the forest. Wild people do not know they are wild. She was not a cog in the imperial machine. Cogs do not suddenly stop. She was, for the first time, a person recorded by the world as a human being. That shamed her. It also allowed her to exhale. War had driven her to extremes. The machinery of peace forced her to confront herself. She did not know where her future lay, but she knew her idea of the enemy had changed, and so had her answer to who she was. Under the faint camp lights, she slowly closed her eyes. It was a state that was neither surrender nor rebirth. It was more like a human being, paused between two worlds, trying for the first time to understand existence on her own terms. And that understanding was quieter than any gunshot, and deeper.